Hi everyone, my name is Ronald Denisio and I'm the Virtual Content Specialist for 7th grade Social Studies. In part 3 of this teacher-facing video series, I will go over strategies for teaching Unit 2, Day 6, Identifying Bias, the Boston Massacre. If you have not done so already, make sure you watch part 1 and 2 of this video series for ideas on how to facilitate Unit 2, Day 5 for your students. This lesson is adapted from Lesson 4 of Passport to Social Studies Unit 2, The Road to Independence. The first few lessons serve to explore the various events that led to the colonies declaring independence from Great Britain. This lesson explores examining bias and propaganda related to the Boston Massacre. We have links provided to the online interactive versions of the sources in the National Archives resource, DocsTeach, as well as the sources embedded in these slides. And if you're in person, you can find the sources used in this lesson on student workbook pages 152 to 155 and 159 to 161. The lesson objective for Unit 2, Day 6, is students will analyze a variety of documents to understand how perspective influenced the key events of the American Revolution. In this lesson, we will discuss the word massacre and the name Boston Massacre. We'll watch a short video clip of Boston Massacre reenactment and have a discussion on bias. Some opportunities for modeling also come at the end of this lesson during the wrap-up, where we will display Paul Revere's Bloody Massacre, we'll define propaganda, and evaluate Bloody Massacre as an example. We'll also have a small class and a whole class discussion. The main learning activity, students will explore bias in different depictions of the Boston Massacre by looking at the documents from the previous day. If you had students work in teaching groups, they can remain in there to discuss bias in different depictions of the Boston Massacre documents. Finally, we'll check for understanding by asking students the following question. How did the Boston Massacre contribute to the colonies declaring independence from Great Britain? For our introduction and model slides, we will take some time to build the necessary background that will help students to engage with the sources in this lesson. First, we'll ask students to define massacre and write down any thoughts or words that come to mind. You can have students think, pair, share this prompt and first work independently, pair up with a partner to discuss, and then come back together as a whole class for students to share their thoughts or words that came to mind. We'll then define massacre as an indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of people, and we'll display some synonyms for students to look at as they think about the definition of massacre. Then we'll ask students what qualifies a historic event to be defined and remembered as a massacre. Who decides on calling such events massacres? And then also, what's in a name? We'll share with students that the colonists referred to the Boston Massacre as the Bloody Massacre, while the British referred to the Boston Massacre as an unhappy disturbance. We'll then share this video from history.com of a reenactment of the Boston Massacre. Then we'll pose this question to students. Based on what you know so far from the images, depositions, and the video, do you think the event in Boston on March 5th, 1770 was a massacre? Why or why not? After our mini lesson, we'll share with students that they will continue investigating different points of view surrounding the Boston Massacre with a focus on identifying bias. Remind students that bias is a prejudice in favor of or against certain people, ideas, or beliefs. For the protocol, we'll have students take turns describing their document to the group. We'll remind students to discuss the person or persons they believe were the aggressors of the Boston Massacre. Here are some guiding questions we can pose to students as they have their discussion. Why does each document offer a different summary of the same event? Would the colonists or British soldiers have agreed with each summary? Why or why not? How does bias contribute to the understanding of the event? After students get a chance to discuss in their small groups, we can introduce Paul Revere's The Bloody Massacre and explain to students that the Bloody Massacre was one of the only depictions of the massacre that most colonists saw outside of Boston. It was distributed widely through broadsides, almanacs, and newspapers. We can discuss as a whole class what can be inferred about the artist who created this source. Does this portrayal seem to show a bias? Why or why not? How would the colonists have reacted to this image and why? Then we can introduce the definition of propaganda as exaggerated information used to influence the opinion of others. And we can pose the following questions to students. Why do you think Paul Revere's version of events was the one most widely distributed? And do you think that Paul Revere's version of events is patriot propaganda? Why or why not? Finally, we'll have students respond to the following question to check for understanding. How did the Boston Massacre contribute to the colonies declaring independence from Great Britain? That concludes the end of part 3 of the Boston Massacre lesson video series. I hope this video series was helpful, and feel free to try out Unit 2 Days 5 and 6, the Boston Massacre lessons with your students.